Good morning, everyone. So, welcome to the story of the week, and I have got a lovely story for you. It's called Flat Stanley by Jeff Brown. Hey, come and look! Arthur Lambchop called from the bedroom he shared with his brother Stanley. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop cared greatly for politeness and correct speech. Hay is for horses, Arthur, not people, said Mrs. Lambchop. But look, said Arthur, panting. So that's Arthur. That's Mr. Lambchop, Mrs. Lambchop. Across Stanley's bed lay his enormous bulletin board. It had fallen on Stanley during the night. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop hurried to lift it from the bed, but Stanley wasn't hurt. What's going on here? He said cheerfully, sitting up. Who said that? This little boy right here. Stanley, do you see something is wrong with Stanley? I guess. Heavens! Cried Mrs. Lambchop. Gosh! Said Arthur. Stanley is flat as a pancake, said Mr. Lambchop. Darnest thing I've ever seen. So what happened? There was this big bulletin board which was right up here on the wall, and it fell on Stanley. But Stanley was not hurt at all. He wasn't hurt. Okay? But something was wrong with him. Something was definitely wrong with him. Now, Mr. Lambchop, this is Mr. Lambchop, Stanley's father. Mr. Lambchop sighed and said, Let's all have breakfast. Then we'll hear what Mr. Dan has to say. So I think Mr. Dan, maybe some sort of doctor, was going to examine Stanley. So see, Stanley is all flat. Look at Mrs. Lambchop. Arthur, Stanley's brother, and Mr. Lambchop. In his office, Dr. Dan examined Stanley. How do you feel? He asked. I felt sort of trickly after I got up, but I feel fine now, said Stanley. Well, that's mostly how it is with these cases. So Dr. Dan had seen such cases before, and somebody became flat. The nurses took Stanley's measurement. Okay, now they took his height. He was 4 feet tall, about a foot wide, and half an inch thick. देखो flat हो गया है. Stanley, look at Stanley. He's all flat. So he was 4 feet tall, about a foot wide. Being flat could be fun. Stanley enjoyed going in and out of rooms by sliding through the crack at the bottom of the door. Arthur tried too, but he just banged his head. So now, Flat Stanley, because he was flat and it had its own advantages. Now he could slide down the doors just like this. He did not need to open the doors because he was flat. And when Arthur tried doing it, he banged his head. Being flat could be exciting. During the holidays, Stanley was invited to visit his friend Thomas in California. Mr. Lambchop brought home an enormous brown paper envelope and said, Stanley, try this on for size. Now, the envelope fitted perfectly. And the next morning, his parents slid him into it, along with an egg salad sandwich and posted him from the box on the corner. Can you believe you became flat and then your parents posted you in an envelope to your friend's house? They don't need to go and drop you. You can just go inside an envelope and just go into a mail, right? So see, this is Stanley. So they got a big envelope because Stanley was flat, but he was still as tall as he was. Okay, Stanley उतना ही tall था अभी भी. Stanley की height कम नहीं हुई थी. He was just flat. So his mother gave him egg sandwiches, egg salad sandwiches, and then he got posted. Now imagine that, how fun that would be to go in an envelope. Can you fit in an envelope? No, it's not that easy to fit in an envelope. Why don't you try making a big envelope for you and then try fitting into it? Right? Stanley had a fine time in California. So now see, he is sunbathing, having an ice cream with friends. Now he's sitting right here in a car and then he has become, see, what has he become here? A board. Yes, a flat board. In the park, one Sunday afternoon, Stanley and Arthur watched some boys flying big kites. Someday, Arthur said, I would like to have a big kite. So now Arthur, Stanley's brother, said that he would like to have a big kite. And Stanley had an idea. So kites are flat. So Stanley said, you can fly me, Arthur. Come on. He gave Arthur the spool and attached the string to his arms. Then he ran across the grass to catch the wind. Up, up, up went Stanley. Arthur let out all the string and Stanley soared high above the trees. Everyone stood still to watch. Look at that. That's Stanley like a kite. That the string. Right here, that's Arthur flying his own brother. Just imagine, Arthur wanted a big kite and Stanley became that big kite. Now what happened to him? But Arthur got tired of running with the empty spool, wedging it in the fork of a tree. He went off for a hot dog. He didn't notice when Stanley became tangled in the branches of the tree. Half an hour passed before Arthur heard Stanley shout and climbed up to set him free. So what happened later on? Arthur got tired and he forgot that his brother is tangled right up on the tree. So there is Stanley. He went to have an ice cream. So after some time, he heard his brother Stanley shout, and then he climbed up to set him free. And then Arthur apologized over and over again that evening. But Stanley was still cross. Stanley was cross. He was sad. He was upset with his brother because his brother forgot him on the tree. So see how angry he looks. But Arthur, he's such a sweet boy. He kept apologizing to his brother. But Stanley was very, very cross. Very cross. The next morning, Stanley and Mr. Lambchop met their neighbor, Mr. O.J. Dart, director of the famous Museum of Art. Mr. Dart looked worried. Another valuable painting was stolen from the famous museum last night, he told Stanley and his father. The police suspect a gang of sneak thieves. They walk at night by sneakery, which makes them very difficult to catch. Okay, so now this is Mr. O.J. Dart. This is Mr. Lambchop. This is Stanley standing there. Now Mr. O.J. Dart is telling them that a very famous painting got stolen from the museum. And he said that the police suspect a gang of sneak thieves. They come out at night and they steal things, and nobody can catch them because of that.